Now, you can put up the slides if you would. I'm going to show you some, I'm not going to be a caption here, they're going to go very fast. This is very fast what I'm going to do, just put up the, that's it, just stay there, Urban Observatory. No, it's not cut off, it's a slide is okay, that's a logo. When I was 26 years old, I did a little project and I made some models with some students of 50 cities in the world. I made them out of plasticine, that kindergarten clay that never hardens. And I made them all to the same scale and did a little book. And you could see the relative size of cities next to each other. And it was just a little exercise, printed about 1,000, and it became iconic. It became very famous. It became cult-like. The plates of the book were framed and put up at the Yale School of Architecture, where it remained for 25 years, and it was on the cover of quite a number of architectural magazines, planning magazines. And there it lingered, and that was in 1962, probably before some of you were born. But I couldn't do much with it in 1962. 1965, for MIT, I did a large statistical atlas of 20 of the major cities of America, all done by hand. There was no computer graphics. There was no anything else you could send it around or draw. It was all hand-drawn. A very complex book where every page folded out to that big, I mean, as big as I can reach, folded so the book was about this big. It was called Urban Atlas, 20 American Cities. Then I proceeded to do 22 guidebooks to cities around the world, all experimenting with cartography. This is not what I was going, this is just a parallel thing. My life is just a bunch of hobbies. And I've always liked maps, mankind's ability to perceive. It really seems that everything is a map. I even think when I look at the score of a tennis match, I see it as a map. I look at how a company does over a period of time, I see that as a map, that diagram. I see any pattern as a map of information. Mankind's ability to perceive really spells map, M-A-P. I find it just fundamental to my life as a way of understanding. I'm trying to get clarity, I'm trying to find patterns. I think the creative person looks for patterns. And if they don't, they should. Because it's in pattern recognition that you figure out what to do next. I'll get back to why I didn't like that speech yesterday later. Well, let's go through these slides quickly. I created this. This is a presentation for an exhibit that's going to open in the Smithsonian Institute on the Mall in the original Smithsonian building called the Castle next February 10th. And what we have is, if you hold it there for a second, that's a big computer, a big screen. This only much bigger, but you can look at it at home yourself. And in it we have, it lives off the cloud, and we have 58 cities now, will be over 100. Probably from this trip, will probably be well over 100 cities, and they're all to the same scale, all with the same legends. And you might think, well, we already have that, only you don't. No two cities in the world do their maps to the same scale or with the same legends. Why would you want that? Well, I was telling somebody yesterday, how would you like to be in an operating room, being operated on, and every surgeon talked a different language, and some use the metric system and some use the English system, and the word for blood was different, and there was no common language. Or that I gave this speech in Finnish. So much of our life is based on being able to be understood. We started with grunts, and then we put a little bit of meaning to those grunts and some of those letters. And this is a very primitive project. The only reason it's important is because people forgot to do it. It's not so sophisticated. It's a pretty dumb idea. Wouldn't it be interesting, since 50% of the population of the world live in cities and it's going up by 2050 to at least 70%, taking up about 3% of the land area. It's where everything takes place. We're in a city, everybody's in a city, everything takes place in a city, and yet improvements, change, success or failure, there's no way for one city to talk to each other. If you want to locate something somewhere, You can't compare Shanghai to Singapore, to Beijing, or to Sao Paulo, or even within the United States. You can't understand the patterns of traffic and how they're affected by where industry is, or where the cases of asthma are relative to the prevailing wind relative to industrial land use. You simply can't make a comparison and find out the next step. You can't understand. And understanding precedes action. And you only understand something relative to something you understand. So now let's go through them real fast. That's 3 cities there. By the way, Singapore is there, is London, and New York. They're all at the same scale. If you look at the plus and minus when you see it, at the end you'll see a website, you can get it, it's free. This is not a business. I'm not selling anything here, trust me. I'm not going public, this is not an IPO, okay? There's a plus and minus there in the upper left-hand corner of each of those things. If you push the plus, that map gets bigger, then all the others get bigger. All the scales follow. If you move the map around, the others move around. Everything stays the same scale. We have about 30 layers of information. This is just the beginning. We'll probably have about 500 layers of information. We'll probably have 1,000 cities eventually. It lives off the cloud, so it keeps on updating itself. Anybody who has that one panel has the whole thing. But you can also look at it online. Let's just keep on going. Wait, stop there for a second. This is interesting. This is the access. I showed this to the PM last night. He was fascinated with this because you look at London, there's no streets to go through London. This is freeway access. And so many minutes to freeway access. I won't go into the explanation. You see Singapore, and then you see New York City. Next. This doesn't give you answers. This just allows you to understand, so individually you can have a beginning place to start making decisions, and to try to free up other information so we can combine 2 different pieces of information to find a third. You layer one over another, and you get a new pattern. Next, next, next. We'll be going back into all the cities. Cordova, Spain was the largest city in the world in the year 1000. 1/3 made up of Muslims, Jews, and Catholics. 500 years later, the Catholics killed off everybody else. This is the mock-up of the room in the Smithsonian. It's the first Smithsonian building, and we'll have a bunch of these panels, as you see, in the room so groups of people can go over it. Next. Next. Keep on going. Will be a whole series of films. By 2015, this is another view of the room. Next. Next. It's like a sort of Sistine Chapel of understanding, and it's all live. Those are the 3 things I told you. Understanding precedes action. You only understand something relative to something you understand. And transforming big data into big understanding. It doesn't end with just big data. If you don't have big understanding, big data is meaningless. So what is big understanding? It's finding the patterns in big data. Next. These are the posters that are done every year. I have 2 partners. I'll tell you about that in the next slide. But this, go back one. There. On the lower left, those are those little models from 1962. You see, they were made out of plasticine, and there's a few of them. I mean, there was 50 cities, so there's hundreds of those things. We just did a selection. But you see Venice there, and you see a little piece of another town, and part of Paris and all, and Versailles and Bern, Switzerland. It's just remarkable. You look at it, and when you go to those cities, you have a completely different experience. It's transformative to have in your mind a mind map of how big the place is and what it means and finding your way. All right, next. Those are my 2 partners. I'm up on top. John Kamen owns Radical Media. He has a number of Academy Awards he did Fog of War, and he's done a whole series of TV shows and stuff. I mean, he's a big deal. He has, as small a deal as I am, he's a big deal. And Jack Dangerman is a really big deal, and he owns the whole space of GSI mapping, all the information mapping. He also owns Landsat, and he's the largest maker of software for information mapping in the world. Now, you might say, well, I have Google Earth, I have that. You can't put 3 cities in Google Earth. Google Earth doesn't have information on it. Google Earth is terrific. You use it to get from point A to point B, but it's not comparative cartography, and it can't be. It comes from a different way maps are made. It's just I like what Sergey and Larry did. It's fine, but this is not competitive with that. It's a different beast. That's a different beast. Anyway, this is fascinating. We're going to do a observatory of healthcare. There's 7 of the books I've done are on healthcare. I used to run a healthcare conference too called TED Med, and I did the TED conference, and so I did one called TED Med. I ran that for a number of years, and it was because 20% of the GNP of the world is on healthcare, and I found that there's no source of finding comparative information on health and well-being, and the interesting thing is when you see the patterns of what different countries do, what federal governments do on health care, 2 things come up. You see some things where you viscerally think they're doing a good job or viscerally think they're doing a bad job. Both of those patterns are equally interesting if you're a healthcare company. If they're doing a lousy job, you want to sell into it. If you're doing a good job, you want to sell into it. I mean, both the extremes of how well or not well somebody's doing are equally interesting. It's not that you don't look at the one or the other. They're both interesting opportunities for people to want to understand things, and the only way to understand things is comparatively. The reason I didn't like that speech, or I had a hard time with it, is that the educational system is broken. Everybody shook their head when they were talking. They all thought it was broken. The educational system is broken. And if you really boil down those speeches, or that speech in particular, what they were going to do is, through technology, make the broken system expand it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Huh? You build the car and it doesn't work. Well, and we don't sell it, let's make a lot of them. I stopped counting at 50 how many times they used the word education, and I stopped counting at 3 the number of times they used the word learn or learning. It's not about education, it's about learning. There should be a board of learning, not a board of education. You can't have teachers, you have to have guides and mentors. And learning is remembering what you're interested in. Everybody in this room did this pattern in their whole life. This is the pattern. Here's a subject, learn this subject, memorize this subject, a week later take a test, forget it, then start that up again. Then forget it. So your whole life has been based on the performance of a test of something you've memorized and then forgotten. Now, I hope everybody would agree with me. If you've forgotten something, you haven't learned it. I don't think I have to make an argument for that, that learning is remembering what you're interested in. It's not how well you did on the test. It's remembering what you're interested in. What you're interested in, you remember. The few people before me were talking about their passions. They really like what they do. They remember it. They probably remember the goddamn scores of tennis matches. They were doing that. The scores of cricket games. They were doing that. I'm not interested in it at all. And I wouldn't remember it if I had to memorize it. I could memorize it. I'd forget it. And you wouldn't get that information out of me in pain of death. But we've all done this cycle. This strange, insane cycle. And you don't just take the courses. There was one time somebody said, well, they pointed to the fact there's some good professors. Okay. I've never asked an audience this. It's okay, I have nothing more to say. Thank you very much. How many really great professors did you have? More than 2. Not many hands up. One person, more than two. I wouldn't base a whole big thing on the fact that we've each had maybe one, if we're lucky, or maybe two. Maybe each of us have had a good mentor, or maybe two. We're talking about little numbers is what I'm saying. It's not a wild response in this room that, oh my God, everybody I had in the school I went to was so fantastic. They were inspirational. They changed my life. They were a mentor. Everything I wanted to know, they helped me on my way. They showed me the path. They were gurus. They were just terrific. And yes, I would like the whole world to hear from them. It just isn't the case. You can't build a system on expanding that ad nauseum. But we can work on interest, and we can work on those in our community that are over 50, everybody being a guide. Maybe that's the service. Maybe after 40. It's like in Switzerland, everybody goes in the army. Maybe everybody is a guide. A guide that, you know, if a kid's interested in cars, and a lot of kids are interested in cars, girls and boys, this is a simple exercise. If you're interested in cars, you can be interested in not only the physics and the mechanics and the design and the countries and the balance of payment and materials and different new materials and composite materials and the imaging of it and speed and chemistry. Do you know when you swallow, the peristaltic action of swallowing is the same as a traffic jam? You can get into biology. You can get into biology and the skeleton and how the car has a skeleton and what's similar and different and what the breaking points are and what the crash points are. It's endless, but that's one subject. You can take any subject and you can rattle off the connections and you will keep the person's interest. Everything connects with everything else. And you don't have to be very bright to do what I just did. There was no big bang thing going off in my head. Oh, well, I couldn't do that. Everybody here can do that. There's not a person here who can't do what I just did. I'm not very smart. I'm just not very smart. I'm just more aware that I'm not very smart than you're aware that you're not very smart.